Have you noticed parents that seem overly involved in their kids' lives, or teenage or college-age kids constantly on their cell phones with mom, or little kids whose afternoon or weekend schedules are micromanaged by their parents? Well, our guest, in her groundbreaking book, A Nation of Wimps, The High Cost of Invasive Parenting, with extensive research, was the first author to connect the dots between over-involved parents and the social crisis of young people today. Hara Estroff Marano is the editor-at-large of Psychology Today. Previous to this book, she wrote a book, Why Doesn't Anyone Like Me? A Guide to Raising Socially Confident Kids. Besides numerous articles in her ongoing column in Psychology Today, Hara's been deeply involved in researching and writing about college students' mental health. Hara, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Hara, what drew you to this subject?
Well, it's very interesting because I never dreamed that I'd end up where I did, because I started writing about the mental health of college students. At the time, I was doing a newsletter. The time, I should say, is 2002. I was putting out a newsletter for Psychology Today on depression, Blues Buster. And I got wind of the fact that there were high numbers of students experiencing depression and anxiety. And I made the assumption, which turned out to be erroneous, that, this must be a Northeast phenomenon of kids in private schools experiencing high pressure to get into the few highly selective colleges in the Northeast. And so I called right into the belly of the beast. I called up a guy by the name of Richard Cattison, who was then the head of Harvard's Mental Health Center and head of the whole Harvard Student Health Services, and asked him what was going on. And he happened to mention that he was on a listserv of all directors of student counseling services in the United States, and he allowed me to throw out a query to him and all of his colleagues on the listserv. And I heard from 500 directors of student counseling services around the country that kids everywhere, college students everywhere, were suffering in rapidly increasing numbers from disorders such as depression, anxiety, panic attacks, self-harm, self-mutilation, eating disorders, and, of course, that ever-popular binge drinking. Except that the binge drinking that was going on and is going on now is very different from the binge drinking that went on when I was a student way back, in the Paleolithic time. And then students drank beer, or occasionally at a frat party went overboard with liquor. But what's happening now is something radically different. Students pregame, that is, they drink before they drink. They drink in their dorms privately, usually vodka. They drink to get drunk, and then when they go out, because they have no social skills, so this lubricates them. And then when they're socially together with other people, they're a little bit more at ease. And then they drink to the point of passing out, which is phenomenal because they do it as a way of having a story to tell. It becomes something that becomes a conversation piece in itself. This is very different. It's purposeful, goal-directed drinking so that they can just hop right over the lack of social skills.
The lack of social skills. Why do they lack social skills? I'm assuming that the previous generation, you're implying, had better social skills.
Well, yes, and they certainly found ways to cultivate them because there was no other way. You had face-to-face interaction with people. So you have a combination of factors. First, you have the high involvement of parents in their lives. And by the way, I just want to go back to how I got involved in this. I reported in 2002 this phenomenon, called it Crisis on the Campus, made headlines all over the United States. re-reported in 2004, found that things had only gotten worse. More students and more severe conditions. And then I reported that, and then I began asking why. And the why was what I found out from all the 500 directors to whom I went back and asked many, many questions. And the answer was, because why are these students breaking down psychologically, which is what I mean by wimps. They're psychologically fragile. They're breaking down because they have no coping skills, including no social skills. And why is that the case? It's because their parents have taken all the lumps and bumps out of life for them because they want their kids to succeed.
Now, is that your belief, or do you have data?
No.
Because it could be other things, like the computer age, that they're on the line all the time and they're...
I don't want to pretend that there's only one cause. The computer age definitely feeds into it. There's no question. So it only really compounds the damage and accelerates the process. Mm-hmm. There's no question about it that the constant use of the computer instead of personal interaction, face-to-face interaction, is helping dramatically to erode social skills. But it's also the fact that parents are not allowing their children to play. Play gets in the way of achievement. Parents are really worried about their kids and want them to achieve success early and get into a few brand name schools, which is their hedge against a competitive future. Mm-hmm. And in the push, with the parents constantly pushing their kids, what are they doing? They're removing play from childhood, and play is where you learn what happens when someone says no. It's how you learn how to join others and play. It's how you learn how to get along with others, negotiate problems. And as I said, this is compounded as kids get older by not having any kind of free association. What happens is your parents drive you to Mandarin classes and to your fencing lessons and to your soccer games, and you're only interacting with kids in a very utilitarian, goal-directed way, as directed by an adult, I need to say. So this is not kids learning how to deal with each other. They're always in situations that are monitored by and directed by adults. So they're not getting those social skills the way they used to.
Could you start this way, maybe? And that's to explain to us the prototype of the really over-involved, as you call them, hothouse parents. I'm hearing certainly parts of that. But if you wanted to show us the model of how not to do it in terms of over-involvement, what would it look like?
Okay, so hothouse parents start before a child is born in the belief that if they expose their child to Mozart or any other kind of highbrow experience, their kid will be on the fast track to success. Now, I do want to say this in defense of parents. Parents are extremely anxious today. This is what's driving all of this hothouse parenting. But I think parents have always been anxious. What's different is the parents have in front of them computers, and they are virtual, constant symbols that the world has changed since they were kids. So they know that the world is a different place. And they're worried about their kids. They know it's a global marketplace. What they don't know, and it's counterintuitive, is that the way to get your kids to achieve is to find their own curiosity, to explore their own curiosity, to find their own passions, and to be able to play freely. because then they're constructing the world that they're going to inhabit later on. But
can I give you a counter argument to that, Hara, that I just thought of? What if, like, you go to a liberal arts college to be exposed to a lot of different ideas to see what's right for you? The parent might respond to you and say, well, you know, we take them to karate classes and music lessons and swimming, and that way we expose them to so many different things, they're going to find what's right for them rather than just playing basketball in the backyard or whatever, tiddlywinks with other kids.
Well, what you're going to have in those scenarios is kids wanting to please the adults. They want to do well. And so they're pleasing the adults. They're not necessarily finding their own passions or following their own curiosity to see where it leads. So the process is entirely different. It gets totally perverted because kids really do want to please adults. They want their parents to like them. They want their teachers' approval. And so in those kinds of situations run by the adults, they're just doing what they need to do. Oh, sure, there's always a screw-off and someone who's going to be the behavior challenge. But by and large, the kids want to do well in those circumstances and please. And so they're going to be little people pleasers and working for the grade and the approval of the teacher.
Rather than following their instincts.
Rather than following their instinct or taking risks and seeing where things go. That's one of the other things that's incredibly important. When you are being pushed at an early age, you're not allowed to fail. Failure's just not allowed. It's not part of the equation. And what is very interesting is that failure, and I think the culture is now seeing more and more stories to this fact, and it was certainly the cover story of the New York Times Magazine of the past week. Failure is the portal to success. Unless you fail and analyze the failure, you're not trying hard, and you're not going to find your way to success. And, you know, if you look at all the stories of people who have been grand successes, the part of the story that gets left out is all the times they tried, and this didn't work, and that part didn't connect, and they got a different result. And in fact, if you look at most inventions, so many of them are the result of failed experiments of a different kind, but they came up with something else that surprised them.
Well, now how, if I may, are parents and institutions helping children avoid failure and the experience of failure?
Okay, because they want them to get all the answers right. Mm-hmm. They don't want kids to figure things out for themselves, just get the answers right. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been contacted by many, many, many deans of, we're talking graduate schools here, graduate business schools, who all tell me the same thing. And this is, by the way, spontaneously contacted by them, I didn't solicit their opinion until after they contacted me, telling me, here are concrete examples of how kids don't want to risk anything. You're in graduate business school. You want to know what questions are going to be on the test. So you want to know what to study. You want to know what the questions are so you can be prepared to answer them. You don't want essay questions because there's too much room, too much gray space there. You want to know exactly everything. You don't want to take a risk and maybe get the wrong answer. Mm-hmm. So that's one very concrete way that people can see there's been this huge change. And another way is that everybody wants an A, and most professors are being forced to give students A's. And, I mean, there have been innumerable stories about grade inflation. Right. And, you know, the famous story of Larry Summers when he assumed the presidency of Harvard. One of the many ways that Larry annoyed some people was he announced that something like 96% of the students at Harvard were getting A's. It just couldn't possibly be.
Well, Hara, how much of this issue with youth today is really caused by overparenting and invasive parenting versus institutional changes like grade inflation and lack of recess and changes in media and computers?
You might say it's the perfect storm, because there is this tremendous amount of overparenting, but while the overparenting is going on, there's a lot of institutional failure. For example, I think it's widely acknowledged by everyone in the education industry that schools are failing, in the sense that there is to put it in the most positive way, there's a huge debate going on about what the nature of education should be and how much of it and where you get it. So schools recognize that something big is going on. We know there's a big problem. You've got to drug a huge percentage of kids to stay in their seats because the curriculum and the way the curriculum is taught is totally boring to most kids and can't hold their attention, yet you put the kids in other environments and they can concentrate just fine.
Can I ask you, Hara, is that anything different than 30 years ago?
No, it's not different from 30, 50, or 100 years ago, but now everyone's in school. So it matters more. And 30 and 50 years ago, not so much 30 years ago, but 50 years ago, you could maintain membership of the middle class without having a college education. In fact, you could maintain middle class membership without even having a high school diploma. There were industrial jobs available. You could be a longshoreman. You could be a bus driver. So it was possible to stay in the middle class without a huge amount of schooling. Those jobs are gone. You cannot be, there's no major industry now. There's so much automation, there's reduced number of jobs in factories, and much has gone, as we politely say, has been outsourced and gone offshore. So it's not possible anymore. We're in the knowledge economy. It's what's in your head that matters, not the size of your muscles. So we have that change. So it matters more about schooling matters much more.
I get it. And I also assume this would put pressure on parents to be the way they are now.
Well, the failure of schools, schools now require parents to monitor homework. That's totally insane. Your parents didn't monitor your homework. Mine certainly didn't. My parents didn't even know whether I had homework. I just did it. And I think most kids would prefer that their parents didn't monitor their homework, but parents feel so much is at stake now in education that they have to monitor their homework, and the schools know it. So they've asked the parents. The schools have actually opened the front door and invited the parents in to be the hall monitors, and I don't think that's good for anybody. And the sooner we can reform our education so that we have an education that actually schools people for the information age and not for the industrial age, the better off we'll all be.
The phenomenon you're talking about with parents, is this just well-to-do parents or upper-middle-class parents?
Well, in a way, it is, sad to say. Here's the amazing thing. We live in a world where half the parents pay too little attention to kids, and half the parents pay too much attention to their kids. And the parents who pay too much attention to their kids are the parents from basically upper middle and upper class parents pay enormous amounts of attention to their kids. I think they should take some of that energy, that willingness to invest in kids, and give it to some of the kids who need it, whose parents are too busy struggling to make ends meet in life that they can't give basic support to their kids. Maybe they live in terrible neighborhoods and the kids are distracted by what's going on in the neighborhood or by television or all kinds of other diversions. They need more parental monitoring.
Is this particularly more so with older parents or with the parents who have one child, this focus on that kid?
Well, I think the fact that we have smaller families has some influence on the phenomenon because all your hopes are riding on one child.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of this is the parents now identify so powerfully with their kids. Parents take their status from how well their children are doing, their kids' achievement. You hear parents say, "We got into Harvard."
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a mark of the parents' status how well their kids are doing in school.
What is wrong with these parents, Hara? Why would they do that? Wouldn't parents do the same 40 years ago?
No, I think parents today recognize that the world has changed. It has changed. I think they're correct in perceiving that the world is different from the world that they grew up in. And we have an everyday reminder of that fact in the computer. We all work with computers, whether it's our iPhones or our iPads or tablets or our desktops or laptops. So we have that reminder every second of the day that the world is different. You can access the entire world in an instant on your computer, that there's now globalized competition. It's not just where you stand in your neighborhood. You're now standing with and being measured against everybody in the whole world. So parents correctly have understood that. What they've done is their anxiety, and I think anxiety has gone along with child raising from the beginning of time, but what is different now is that parents have let their own emotions like anxiety take over. It used to be the parents bit their tongue and didn't transmit their anxieties to their kids. But now they do transmit their anxieties to their kids, and they keep emphasizing how important it is that their kids do well so that ultimately they can get into Harvard.
And some of this, I assume, extends to micromanaging.
It extends to amazing micromanaging so that you're monitoring your kids' whereabouts 24/7. There are iPhone apps that let you know where your kid is, whether your kid has gone outside of an approved zone, so that and then you get buzzed, and then you call your kid to say, "Hey, where are you? You know, you crossed this street when you should have been on this side of the street." So there's an enormous amount of micromanaging, knowing what the kids are doing every second of the day, actually facilitating that by driving them around every second of the day, knowing what class they're in, who they're talking to, and giving kids no opportunity to develop their own motivation, their own self-control, because parents are doing it all for them. So one of the results you get is kids who are lacking in a variety of coping skills.
What effect does this have on the parents' mental health?
Well, the parents are allowing their anxiety to run rampant. They are, interestingly, they're putting much more into the parent-child relationship than into the parent-parent adult relationship, which it turns out is the single most secure envelope for raising a child. That positive emotional relationship between two parents in a household is really the best environment for raising a child.
Sure.
So parents aren't having any fun because they're not coupled and going out and enjoying their own friends. So we know that adults' social circles have shrunken enormously. So they're enormously investing in their kids, and their kids are carrying the burden of having to provide an enormous amount of emotional gratification for their parents.
So what happens when these kids go to college?
Right.
What are you hearing from mental health directors of colleges? What are the ways this shows up in their mental health?
Well, it shows up in their mental health because they're breaking down psychologically. So they leave the protective cocoon of home. They hold it together until they get to campus. And there, without the protective help of mom or dad or mom and dad, their anxieties run rampant. They develop panic attacks. They develop depression. They begin harming themselves. They binge drink. These are all manifestations of their inability to handle any speed bump in their life. And they fall apart. No, the interesting thing that's happening in colleges is that the colleges are really also widely throwing open the doors to parents. So whereas once, I don't think my parents ever came up to college. There were parents' days, but only a few parents ever showed up for them, and no one ever took them seriously when I went to college. Now, Parents' Day is practically every weekend at colleges. Parents are like storming the gates. Colleges have to have these special bouncers to get rid of the parents. They can't get rid of the parents. The parents want to stay and hang out with their kids. So you have this infantilization of parents who somehow over-identify with their kids and they want to be involved in their kids' activities. It's kind of pathetic because it's a marker that the adults really don't have a big life of their own.
Let me ask you here, do parents get mad at you when they hear you talking? They say, well, that's not true, or I have to, or whatever, and get mad at you?
What they sort of listen to me with crossed arms. One or two of them will see the light and eventually send me a note and saying, oh, you saved my life, you saved my child. But essentially, and especially the more affluent ones, you can't tell them what to do. They're doing everything right. They know what they have to do. They manage their kids. They write their kids' college applications. They write their essays. And they feel that they have to do this because they make a perfect analysis of the world and what needs to be done. And the more affluent they are, the more convinced they are of their own power and the need for control and that they're on the right path. They all recognize, this is the interesting part, they all recognize that they grew up and got to be so perfect without all of this input. But they can't reconcile that with their kids not needing all this input. It's a big disconnect.
Yeah, you're right. For these parents, for the people listening, why don't we end with some tips from Hara on ideas about parenting you think are critical?
Well, I think probably the single most critical tip for parents, and this is parents of children of any age, is to let kids play and let them play freely and let them make up their own play. This is incredibly important, and including rambunctious play and pretend play without adults around, because when adults are around, it changes the way kids play. They don't engage in the kinds of activities that they do on their own. And when they're on their own, they're running around and they're making up scenarios, and these are really important because these scenarios have tremendous meaning for the kids, and when they engage in them, they're very willing to subordinate their own impulses to the play for everybody else, so that they're learning self-control. And active play, running around, active play, tag and running around and, God forbid, even falling and scraping a knee, believe it or not, builds brains. Neuroscientists have measured the fact that an enormous number of genes for nerve growth are turned on during active play. And they can measure this effect 30 minutes after an active play period. And what's being turned on are genes in the area for growth of the executive center of the brain, where kids learn how to manage themselves, make decisions, pay attention, focus. These are all being developed in play. So it isn't just, you don't just say play is good for kids. They can measure that play stimulates brain growth.
What would be number 2?
Number 2 is have dinner with your child as often as possible. Okay, it doesn't have to be dinner. It has. If you can only get together at breakfast and have a conversation. And everybody should be able to participate in this conversation. And what it does is kids learn how to be an adult. They get so much out of this. They learn to love these moments of being together. It encourages them to want to be like adults. And guess what? A hell of a lot of learning is going on. A lot of information transpires during these periods, whether it's how to hold a fork and a knife and how to be polite, to information about animals, the world, politics, all important. Kids absorb what they can absorb. So there's no need to lower the level of conversation. Kids will really begin to get a lot out of it. That's incredibly important, and there are studies correlating achievement with having family dinner together.
Okay,
So
what would be number 3?
Number 3 would be to learn how to praise your children. And you can't praise your kids by saying, oh, you're such a genius, you're so smart. Praise your kids for getting something specific right or doing something specific well. And then ask them what they got out of it. So, my gosh, you played that piece of music really well. What do you like about that music? How do you feel about performing?
I take it the flip side of this is don't praise them when they don't deserve it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's damaging to kids. If you praise kids, and you praise them very generally, like you're such a genius, or you're naturally gifted on the athletic field, they really come to doubt themselves when that moment comes when they don't do well. And so they wind up not putting the effort into it.
Okay, in the interest of time, can we move to number 4?
Number 4 is the flip side of that, which is learn how to deliver criticism to your kid. And when you criticize a child, of course, it's got to be specific, and don't raise your eyebrows when they don't bring home all A's. It's important to ask your kid, how do you feel about how you did? You know what? It may be in a subject your kid doesn't really give a damn about. So you need to know how your kid feels. So how do you feel about how you did? Or what do you think, how well do you want to do? What do you think you need to do as well as you want to do? And sometimes kids need more sleep. Sometimes they need a little bit more understanding of the concepts. Sometimes really smart kids don't always get something on the first try because their heads are filled with too many possibilities.
You know, I'm hearing a theme here, if I may, that you're suggesting help the kid get an internal locus of control and his own sense of efficacy rather than supervise everything he's doing.
Right, but the kid needs space to get, you don't get a sense of your own efficacy unless you get to experience failure, which allows you to develop coping skills. And the double beautiful double whammy of developing coping skills is you not only develop the specific coping skill when you face a challenging situation, you develop the sense of accomplishment and the sense that, you know what, I can handle what life throws at me. So it's really very important to allow your kids to face challenging situations and figure out their way through them by themselves.
Well, Hara Estroff Marano, I thank you very much for the wonderful time we spent together and for the contributions you've made to people's thinking. And I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.